Hello YouTube, welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at the 6th episode of my series on how to build a Windows Server 2012 R2 the proper way. Our last video was all about DHCP, and we're even going to get into that again either in the end of this video or the next video. But this video, guys, is all about Active Directory replication. We're also going to show you in this video how to join a computer to the domain. But I thought I should explain what joining a computer to the domain means. The domain is kind of like a word for network, but it's not really fully describing what it is. Your domain is your network name. So if I were to say that your computer is going to join that domain, think of it like a secure, think of it kind of like a secure circle net inside of a LAN, inside of a network. And this network, or this secure network, is the domain. And when you join that domain, your computer all of a sudden has to obey the rules of this secure network or domain. So we're going to show you how to join actually a server, because it's the same thing as a Windows 8.1 computer, to the domain. And we're also going to show you how to set up Active Directory replication. After we set up the second server on the domain, we're also going to show you how to make it replicate data back and forth and make a fault-tolerant Active Directory domain services installation. So this is also one of the things that's under Microsoft best practices, and it's also under the best practice analyzer that you will run on your domain controller, which I'll probably show you later when we take a look at Active Directory again, when we get into some more advanced concepts, okay? So now what we're going to take a look at is Active Directory replication, but first we have to join the computer to the domain. Let's take a look.
So let's remote into this guy. We'll take a look here. Ooh, that's not the right password. I say yes. Oops. And we're going to grab this guy here. So as you can see, it's actually right now it's connected to a different domain controller than we want it to, and it's connected to a different DHCP server than we want it to. So we're going to do a release. And actually, I'm probably going to lose connection, so let's do this. Let's go over to the host. Wrong machine. Let's go over to Beast, and we're going to log in. And we're going to type, which is going to kick us out of our other session. And we're going to type ipconfig release. And what this is going to do, guys, over on the second domain controller is it's going to tell it to get rid of its IP. As you can see, the computer now has an IP address in that range, or the server, I should say. I keep calling it a computer. If we do an ipconfig all, you can see all the different information. Then, for instance, you can see here that right here you can see that the gateway is 5.10, the DNS server is 5.105, and we're in the subnet that we want. So the next thing that we got to do is essentially set up a static IP. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll come back in a minute. Okay, guys, here we are back, and I've set up a static IP now. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to join the domain. So if we go over here, what we're going to do is we're going to click the folder. This is just like a Windows 8.1 computer. We're going to right-click here, Properties. Welcome back, guys. I decided I would reshoot that video because I wanted to show you guys in full screen. It's easy for me as a Hyper-V administrator to actually remember that it's such a low quality experience in that window because I'm so used to that window. I find it very comfortable. So let's just join this guy to the domain. Now I might get an error here. But generally, if you do get an error, the problem is going to be usually a network error. It's usually because the DNS information hasn't rolled down to your machine. Usually the ipconfig release and renew is what's going to help you with that. But it should welcome you to the domain. I might have to reset the computer account. Oh, there we go. So welcome to the Sysadmin domain. Now, what that means is I'm now going to be registered in Active Directory for the other computer. We're going to restart that and have a look at what that is going to look like when we log back in. We're going to lose connection. We're going to pop back over to our host, and we're going to go take a look actually at, let's minimize this. We're going to take a look at this guy here. And what we're going to do, we should see that DC2 is now a member of the domain. So this is where your computer is. Now we'd want to move that out, right? And so because it's a desktop, actually it's a virtual machine. Because actually it's not a desktop at all. What am I thinking? It's going to be a domain controller soon. But if it was a desktop, I'd move it to the desktop's OU. If it was a laptop, I'd move it to the laptop's OU. But it's actually going to become a domain controller. So soon, DC1 will have DC2 there, and I'm not going to have to move it myself. When I make it a domain controller, it's automatically going to go in this built-in OU called domain controllers. So that's an important thing to know, is that you do have to move your stuff out of there. However, it will put it in the default. So the default computer's OU will get the computer until it becomes a domain. Once it becomes a domain controller, then it'll go into the domain controller OU. Anything else though, laptops, desktops, unless you use group policy to change this, you'll have to manually do it. But let's see if our server is ready. We're going to go back over to the host just to kind of watch the reboot process. When it comes back up, we're going to be able to log into it. Once you join a computer to the domain, you'll have to hit Alt-Control-Delete when it comes back in to log in. That's how you know you successfully joined it, is when you see that. But usually if it tells you it's successfully joined, you can have a safe bet that it did successfully join. Some other things to point out. I just want to remind you guys, always change your default username for the domain administrator account. That's one thing you should do. You should also make sure for a domain controller that you set a static IP. Now, we set a static IP, and I think before I might have led you guys to believe that you needed to set a static IP in order to join the domain. That is not the case. You only need a static IP if you want to make it a domain controller. So I just did that beforehand because it's going to be a domain controller, but that is not a requirement. And the reason that says low disk space is because it's for my clustering stuff I study. It's just my quorum partition, if anyone was wondering. Alright, so the server's going to come back up. When it does, I'm going to be ready over here. Okay, server's back up. We want to go to 201. And this time we're going to type in sysadmin. And it's important, guys, to make sure that you don't use the domain admin account for things you don't need to. For studying purposes, this is fine. So you'll get this security warning. Just say yes. By this point, you should know that. Now we're going to do the exciting and fun part. We're going to make this a domain controller and join it to the current domain. Remember back on our fourth video about Active Directory domain services when I showed you guys those three different options when we made it a domain controller? We're going to use one of the options there that you guys were probably wondering what that was for. Or maybe you guys already do know if you guys are veterans to Windows Server. So this is going to load up. And what we're going to do is we could also just make it a domain controller and then join it to the existing forest, or we could join it first to the domain like we've done and then join it up. So you've got a couple different options. The old command, like I said, used to be DC promo. Now you have to do it through this GUI wizard. So we're going to say this. We're going to say Active Directory domain services. Add features, just like before. I'm going to fly through this a little bit faster than last time because we've already done a video on that. It's the promotion that you guys are going to want to see. So this is going to take a little while, guys, as you guys have seen before. I'm going to pause it and we're going to come back. Okay, now that it's done, again, we could go up and do the little triangle thing that I do underneath the flag, but this time we're going to do it this way. We're going to come in here, we're going to click promote this to domain controller. And here we get this screen that you guys should remember from video 4. I hope you guys do remember because it probably might have something to do with that on the test. But here we get those three options again. Add a domain controller to an existing domain, add a new domain to an existing forest, add a new forest. So which one do you think we're going to pick here? The answer would be add a domain controller to an existing domain. Domain is sysadmin.lan. So we're just going to click next. Now by default, it's going to become a GC, Global Catalog, which is basically a computer that's going to answer a lot of different information. It's going to be the global catalog. It's a good idea to make most of your domain controllers global catalogs, but keep in mind that making them global catalogs increases replication. I may cover that on the 4th video, I'm not sure. We won't cover what a read-only domain controller is because they're not used very much. In my opinion, they're not that important. Now, if this was a different site, we'd want to make sure that we break it off in sites and services, which again, I'll show you in another video. So we're going to want to pick a password for the directory service restore mode password. I always like to use the domain admin password. You don't have to use the domain admin password. I just find it makes things a little bit easier to remember. There might be a reason not to, security or something like that, because you can brute force the local user's account because they're stored in the local SAM database. But then again, you could also do that with the domain controller, so I don't think that's any less insecure. Again, this error, I've been seeing this since Server 2003. Don't worry about it. It's not actually an error, it's a warning. Now, this is important. You could say any domain controller I want to replicate from, or you could say in particular, I just want to replicate from DC1. This would be important to edit or change or make a note of if you were going to, let's say, have like 6 or 7 domain controllers for fault tolerance, which you might if you get a good job in system administration or IT. You're going to probably see scenarios where you have at least 2 domain controllers, if not 4, 5, 6, or a whole cluster of domain controllers. So you want to make sure that you replicate not from just any domain controller. You want to make sure that your domain controllers are replicating in a sense that makes sense. So, you might want them to replicate to the next one over in the next town, and then that one replicate to the next one, the next town. Or you just might want to leave it at any domain controller. It really depends on what you're doing. Now, install from media, that's basically another thing you could do, or you could basically use answer files to install Windows Server. If you already had like a custom configuration or something like that, that's very advantageous. We're not going to do that. We're going to say any domain controller for our network. We're going to want to, again, think about where we're going to put all these different locations, the log files, the database folder for the nts.dit, the syslog folder, everything like that. Then you're going to want to go ahead and click Next. Again, this might be on the exam, these locations, sysvol, database folder. Click Next. Again, we talked about answer files and stuff like that. You could go and get the script or the answer file from here. So we're not going to do that. We're going to click Next, but we probably would want to just double check that everything in here is what we want. We're going to click Next. So that's going to go through and do its stuff. It came back actually right away. That was pretty fast. It says all prerequisite checks have passed. You will get some warnings. Don't worry about it. As long as you get this green check mark, you can go ahead and click Install. Now this will take some time because this is actually building the domain. So we're going to come back when this is done. And we're going to take a look at what this means once they're both set up. There's still a little bit more that I have to show you guys, so please stick around because the next little parts are going to be, or the next bits are going to be quite important as well. Okay, thanks. So here we are back, guys, at the first domain controller. Let's go take a look at Active Directory. As you can see, the second DC is there. If you can't see it, you might want to hit refresh. And the computer account's still there. We'll hit refresh and you'll see it'll disappear. But as you can see, it's now, they're both global catalogs. It's in the domain. The other thing we're going to want to do, and this is just more for best practices, is we're going to want to go set up the network adapters properly because we want them to replicate at each other. I'll show you what I mean. So we're going to sign in. And what we're going to do is we're going to change the network adapter settings. Remember I told you I set these statically? It will change some of our static settings. It'll put in itself as a DNS entry, but we want to edit it because we got to make sure we meet best practice analyzers. So this is actually correct. Long as the second domain controller points back at the first one, that's perfect. And then the second DNS server should always be itself. You can add others in here as well. You can go to the DNS tab and add others. But for right now, that's fine, just 2. And that looks like it's properly set up. Let's go back over to DC1. Back here on DC1, we're going to go ahead and check out the Open Network and Sharing Centers here. And don't listen to these little triangles. They lie a lot. And it's pointing at itself still. So what we're going to want to do for first is we're going to want to point that at 201 and then back at itself. And that's going to give proper replication. Because the primary DNS server is the primary Active Directory server, DC1, is also the primary DNS server. And it should always point to the secondary for its preferred. For its alternate, it should point back at 127.0.0.1, which is itself. And the same thing applies for the other server. The other server, DC2, back here on 201, it's going to be, like we just configured it, it's going to be pointing for preferred DNS at the other domain controller, the other DNS server. And for alternate DNS, it points back at itself. That's going to give us a cross-pattern replication. I mean, it's actually not going to impact replication at all. It's just more smooth to have it pointing at itself. That way, if one goes down, it's still looking at the other one for resolution. It's still going to be accessible. So make sure you guys do that. But that pretty much wraps it up for Active Directory replication. To make sure that replication is working, you guys want to make sure that you get a clean repadmin. This is to test if your replication is working. This is repadmin sync all, and what this command is going to do is it's going to tell you if it had any problems replicating. And as you can see, it terminated with no errors, and it replicated back and forth. That means that our domain is working right now and it's fully fault tolerant. If you get errors, that would usually indicate that your data is not getting replicated back and forth. And what this does, what's great about it, is it means that if one server goes down, all the information is on the other server. Also, if one server goes down, internet still works for people. People are still able to log on, etc. Active Directory controls a lot of different things. It controls the time on client computers. It controls if people are able to log on. It controls if you're able to make new objects in Active Directory. And later when we talk about more advanced stuff with Active Directory, we'll get into what's called operation masters, or they used to be called FSMO roles, or flexible single something multiplex. I forget now what the old thing means, but they're now called operation masters. So that pretty much wraps it up for having two domain controllers and how to set that up. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, because it's very essential that you guys know how to do this to set this up, because having one domain controller is a point of failure. Unless it's a small business server, then, you know, you really should have two domain controllers even if you have a small business server, but small business server does get away with that. I hope you guys liked my video. Please rate and subscribe, and thank you for watching.